Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
We're here to talk about software design. What is it? The relationship with software architecture. Thinking about how we communicate, how we're going to do things, how we evolve that for organizations big and small. And so I've got two awesome guests with me who I'll introduce in just a moment. But I just want to say that this is designed to be kind of an interactive session. So we'll get our lovely panelists to just introduce themselves in a minute. I've got a couple of questions, but I also do very much want to take questions from the audience. So there will be opportunities. So if you want to ask a question, you stick your hand up and we will deal with it appropriately. We're all grown up, Steve. You've been around this stuff long enough. So when we start off, actually, we've got Jacqui and Simon. Maybe, Jacqui, can you introduce yourself for us?
I can. So I'm Jacqui Reed. I'm the author of Communication Patterns. Last time I looked in this bookshop, there was only one left. Woo. In that book, I talk about communication, not at the technical level, but the first section's all about like visual communication with diagrams, and then it talks about like knowledge communication and lots of other stuff. So I did that, and I talk about lots of things to do with architecture, software design, which is what we're going to talk about a bit today. And I run my own consultancy, which is called the Ministry of Software Design, which people quite like because they tend to think of things like the Ministry of Silly Walks or the Ministry of Magic. So yeah, just think of me as the Ministry of Magic.
Ministry of Sound.
Yeah, that one.
That's the first one you think of.
Yeah, that one too. But yeah,
If you're our age.
the Ministry of Software Design. Yeah, cool.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Simon Rohrer. I work here in Denmark. Though I'm not Danish, you can probably hear that. I work for Saxo Bank. I'm head of enterprise architecture and ways of working there. I've been there for nearly 7 years now. As well as that, I'm also co-author, or at least contributor, to John Smart's book, Sooner, Safer, Happier. The chapter I wrote in that is called Continuous Attention to Technical Excellence. It's the technical chapter in what's not meant to be a particularly technical book, but that also focuses on sort of design and architecture, both in the small and the large.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So I guess that kind of one of the things I wanted to do this panel for is this concept of software design, because we hear the word architecture a lot, software architecture, and we often hear the word design in our context as often we think in terms of maybe graphical design. And Jacqui, you've been doing a lot of work in this space about defining what software design is. And I thought maybe we could start off with what is software design?
So if I asked everyone in this room what software design is, I bet I would get like 100 different actual definitions of what it is, because it's one of these things that people think is like different things. Like, I mean, there's certain words like event. So my talk I did the other day, event means like everything as well. So people tend to think of software design either as the design of like the code and how we're going to lay that out, or they think of it as like the UX stuff, the UI and that kind of design. But actually design comes through the whole of software. You've got your context and you've got things in that context that are going to flow down into your end sort of result. And you actually have to design at every single level. You have to work out what people want. That's going to go into the architecture. In the architecture, you are doing forms of design. In your engineering, you are also doing forms of design. So it's the bit that people tend to forget about. It's the bit that sort of they go, oh, but we need to get this out by the end of the week. So we'll just forget that bit, which is code. It's fine. So that's kind of the way I look at design. It's in everything, but people kind of think of it as like the top bit and the bottom bit. But
so there's something about flow and about cross-cutting, right? So
yeah.
So when we talk, so is it like a set of decisions we've made, design? Do we decide, or are these things enforced upon us? I mean, is this where we get to make choices rather than where choices are forced upon us?
Yes, I think it is. Like, people talk about architecture decision records, but I try and get people to do decision records for everything, because you make important decisions that aren't architecture, and your business makes important decisions. They make important decisions about their strategy, about their hiring, about their finance. And so really they should be writing these things down in the same way as you would an architectural decision record. So I tend to just call them decision records instead. But I think a lot about design isn't us deciding, it's us working out what other people need. So it's finding out from all the stakeholders. It's not just the end customer, it's the business. What does the business need out of this? And getting all of that to then make the decision. Because it's not just us going, oh, you know what, I think we're going to use Kubernetes. Or I think we're going to make this a web app, or we're going to make this a mobile app. It's what people actually need.
So Simon, you've spoken before about how you kind of take that business context, what the business need, and kind of get that filtering down, because you work in quite a large organization, right? So getting that information about what people need to where it needs to get to people to make better decisions, to Jacqui's point. So like, I mean, how do you approach that?
In a few ways. I mean, I think design happens over, I love what Jacqui's done in terms of sort of different frames. And I talk a lot about self-similarity and fractals at different scales. But stuff also happens on different time frames as well. So I think in the small, design happens sort of almost in the moment. And as you go up and up and up, design has to happen over sort of longer time periods. So if you're going to change something, I mean, certainly the scale of organization I work in now, historically I find it relatively small. I used to work for a huge bank in London, and now I work for I feel is a relatively small organization, but for some it's very large. It's mid-sized. We have overall about 3,000 people, about 800 to 900 developers, depending. But getting decisions down to sort of 900 developers for stuff that affects all of them, I mean, that's a communication problem.
Yeah. First and foremost.
My big takeaway from the conference was from this stage yesterday where Pat Kua said, well, for software design, dry, don't repeat yourself, is important. For communication, cry. Continually repeat yourself. So for getting large scale decisions, you can't just tell people once. You've got to tell them time and time again. You've got to use channel after channel after channel, depending on the breadth of how those decisions affect people.
I once heard someone say that you've only, talking in terms of like when you're trying to sell a vision, or you're trying to explain what you're trying to do, or a change you're trying to make, that you've only communicated it enough when somebody you've never even met is telling you what's supposed to be going on without them realizing you're the source of the information. You need to hear it back. Now, I think you both kind of mentioned about how you communicate, and I think we've both talked in different ways about these idea of decision records. Just firstly, a show of hands, everyone here using architectural decision records regularly? I'll say regularly. Okay, so probably about a quarter of the audience, because I said regularly because I think a lot of people try it but don't stick with it. And sort of, you kind of mentioned a little bit this idea of we should be documenting all kind of decisions. But specifically, when you look maybe the architecture ones first, we'll look beyond that. Like, how do you see the role of what is an architecture decision record? What's the purpose of one?
So it's basically, you are recording why you made a decision. You're recording other information about like the context, all those kind of inputs to it, the options that you're picking between. But the whole point is really to record why you did that, because then when someone later on says, why did we do this? Or they say, we want to change this, then you can go back to it and go, okay, yeah, I think you're right. We should change this because this stuff isn't relevant anymore. And then you can supersede it and make a new decision record. But sometimes you go back to it and go, oh, yes, there was a good reason for this. And it's very helpful because some of these things just pop up. Birgitta Vogler likes to call it a whack-a-mole decision, where people just keep going, but why? And then they spend 2 days kind of working it out, and over years it's a lot of wasted time. And you go, oh no, we had to do that because of this. So if you've got that written down, you can refer to it. It's really good for onboarding people. So you don't say, okay, here's 1,000 decisions, read through them. You go, okay, read the first 10 and then read 21 and 56 and 57. Those are the ones you need to look at.
So one of the things you pulled out there, which I think is quite important, we were talking about a bit earlier, is like by having it written down on why you did it, you kind of almost say there isn't, you can challenge. It's not like this is how it's done here. You at least get to ask why. And to your point, if the context has changed, you can change your mind, right? Because it's like it's almost giving you permission. Are you using them in Saxo?
We are more and more these days. From the ones that affect everybody, and then encouraging other people to adopt them within domains or even within teams. And something we discussed earlier in the week, I think that the why and having a record of the why is important. But I think the other half of the importance of architecture decision records and the process of them is the conversation. It's getting the stakeholders involved. The architecture decision record should never be the one matrix style architect said, this is the decision, and there you go. It's a process, and you get the stakeholders involved, and you consider the options, and the etymology of decide is about cutting off. It's literally a cut. So you're cutting off a bunch of stuff, and they may be people's favorite options. So getting them involved and getting them in that dialogue as to why it's this one and not the others, it's so important. Equally as important as recording the thing.
Just a reminder, if anyone does have any questions about anything we're talking about, just stick your hand up. I'm happy to include. Anyone got any questions about records or decision records? Actually, have anyone here tried using them and it didn't work? Because I saw some hesitation. Like, do you want to comment on what was it didn't work for you about the decision records? Was it just a... Did you have a question, sorry, or did you... Oh, no, okay, thanks. So there is something, because I think the analogy we use a little bit was around like almost like the concept of the agile story. And there's this old adage that like a story is a placeholder for a conversation, right? We put a story down to say that we need to have a conversation. I almost find that decision records, they make us, it's the other way around, but it's almost like sometimes giving us a need to stop and have a chat. Like, I think we're often quite time poor, right? There's often the thing where that sort of the pace of just the work in the weeds is just driving us forward. So I think it's about saying that you should be able to stop and think about where we're at. I'd imagine that's a problem with the software design. To your point, it kind of weaves all the way through. So when you're in that moment, when you're in that sort of day-to-day, I was saying the word grind, the day-to-day grind of software delivery. But how do you create that space where you can stop and talk about the design or take the design into account? What sort of things have you found that work in that space?
I've found that a lot of people say to me, oh, but I can't just ask for 2 or 4 weeks to sit down and do design. But we're not working in Waterfall now, are we? So we don't need to sit down for that long and do design. What you do is you just do it as you go along. So we talk about like making these vertical slices. So the thing that my husband and I have created is called the ACE model. And if you want the visual of it, have a look at acemodel.com because it's a nice visual. But what we're looking at with that is starting with that context, and then you have all your customers in that context. If you're at the level of, say, your enterprise, you've got things like laws and regulations in that context. If you're at the level of like your team, then you've got other applications and all policies from within your organization at that context. And so you can look at your it's like a kind of sort of an onion, but it's not an onion because I've tried to visualize this. It's great fun. But at every level you have a context and you have design activities and you have architecture activities because we architect the business as well. We have enterprise architecture. We think about the business processes. So at that level, you've got all these business processes around you. And so whatever you're doing is affected by that because you've got to link in with it, that you're getting input from those things. And so just at every level, you have to think about all of these things all the way down to the engineering. And so it kind of starts looking a bit waterfally, but then it's actually, look at these vertical slices so that you can go, right, okay, I'm going to do enough design to move on to the architecture and enough architecture to move on to the engineering. I don't have to do all the design first and then all the architecture next, because that's not how we work anymore.
Right.
Was there a question?
Yeah, so speaking of engineering, so I was recently in a project where we had sort of a legacy system. We had to do something with like capital D, capital S. And so the architectures, they draw kind of like a minimal viable skeleton, as you would, presented it to the team of domain experts. And immediately there was tension because the architectures felt, well, we just threw a stick in the ground. This was a start. But the engineers felt, you drew boxes on a like slide. That means it's decided. And it created this tension. So where I think the best result were if they worked together. How do you socialize that? How do you like get started in that process so that like the architectures can actually do architecture work and the engineers can do engineer work and they can work in harmony and not pulling in different directions?
Yeah, really good question. One of the things that I talk about with architecture decision records is the statuses of it. If you say that the status is proposed, people don't feel that they can contribute as much as if you say it's a draft. So you'll get a lot more contribution from that. But yeah, with that, like, oh, we've just done this architecture. What do you think of it? It's like, but you didn't talk to us. Even if you've got legacy software, do not assume the legacy software does what the stakeholders want it to do, because someone, even if you built it, because someone has probably not listened to someone at some point. So I think even if you've got legacy software, it actually can be better to start with a blank slate and just go, right, communication, we're going to collaborate here. We're going to find out what you really want. And then we can look at the old thing and go, well, actually, like half this stuff isn't even used. So we can just throw that out for now. This bit does what they want. This bit doesn't actually do what they want. And so you produce what they really want.
No, I would agree. And I'd say software design and architecture to a massive degree are sort of facilitating roles. They're about getting people to have conversations. So if the architects are presenting something and they're making people feel as if it's an already done decision, then I guess they're not playing the social role they should be doing.
Yeah.
They should be listening. They should be even sort of reading body language and saying, look, like you said, this is a sketch. This is, as Jacqui said, it's a draft.
Yeah, you can even do it in a sketchy format.
Throw rocks. Exactly. I mean, Jacqui talks about how to use different typefaces and sort of styles to show that this is a sketch. I love this stuff in Jacqui's presentations. You know, make it feel as if this is tentative while it is. And there's a whole bunch of ways to do that.
I think like an architect, right, in an organization will have a role and they'll be accountable for the architecture. So that they're on the hook for the architecture, right? And then it's all about how the architect does it. So I am accountable for the architecture. I'm responsible for it, but then how do I create it? So if you co-create it, and that's how you think about doing it, then I think that's the best model. But sometimes it's just like their only way of understanding how to be accountable is I've got to do it myself, just got to get done. And it's like breaking that impasse is, I think, can absolutely be tricky. I do think there's something I touched on earlier, though, that I think there's another thing that often gets missed with architects is, like in the same way that decisions made by business stakeholders impact our lives and what we do impacts our users, when an architect makes a decision, they are sort of creating part of the system in which the developers live. There's this concept called habitability. It comes from a code concept, but I think works well in an architectural concept. It comes from architecture, the built environment. Like I've made a decision as an architect, so that imposes a set of conditions on you as a developer that you're probably going to live in for the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And if I've made your life miserable, you know, so I think that's the other part of it is like, you know, it's you are creating an environment in which your developers are going to be living for a period of time. So I think you do have to do it together.
Does that make sense?
Any other questions about kind of architectures and working with developers? There's a question in the middle here, and we'll come to you in the front row. So if you got the question, chap in the middle there.
Hi. So I have a question regarding ADRs. At our company, we have seen several attempts to kick it off. Several teams do it independently, but it never has become the source of truth where people go and see and look up what has been decided. Do you have any tips how to start that? Kind of to set the seed? to make it successful.
I find that one thing that happens with all types of documentation is people go, oh, it's all in SharePoint or it's all in the repo. But the thing is, most people don't have access to that repo, or a lot of people don't use the SharePoint in their daily workflow. So if it's somewhere that people don't actually ever use or can't use, then you're not going to get people to use it. So if you've got decisions about your about a particular repo, put them in there, because you're probably not, people who don't have access to that repo probably don't need to know about those decisions. They're too low level. But then the higher level decisions that affect more teams, maybe you're using Notion, Confluence, SharePoint, poor you, Confluence, poor you, to be honest, a wiki, whatever, put them at the level that people will access them. And then if you're using, if your financial department's using it, then whatever finance is using, if they're using SharePoint, that's fine. If this part of the business is using Notion, because all businesses have multiple places, put it where people who need it will use it. Don't try and force them to change their workflows, because it just won't work.
I think the move to remote working, for me, in many ways is quite sad, because information radiators, this old concept of you having your room where you work, where stuff is on the wall, it's sort of disappeared, because you know, yes, you do work, but there's nowhere you sort of have an eye level that you can't avoid looking at anymore. It's quite hard. So this is, again, it's over communicating, pushing stuff on multiple channels. This is where stuff is. You know, maybe a pinned message in a Teams or a Slack channel, stuff like that. But try and replicate that information radiation, that it's easy for people to see these things.
But I think there's, in both cases, like, where are people already looking? Let's put it there. Let's not give them a new place to go to, because it gives them a new place to ignore. So I think that's really valuable. It's really useful.
And you can also have a sort of front door to all your decisions. So you can have like a high level and go, right, okay, the decisions for architecture are here, for this project are here. And so people can sort of find it. But I think I mentioned earlier, make it part of the onboarding process as well. So you don't have to read all of them, but here are some important ones. And here's where you go. If you have a question, go here first.
I'd also say if you have like sort of meetings that are maybe part of the heartbeat of your delivery. So for example, maybe you have like a showcase, or you have those periodic retrospectives, whatever you might have that sort of just a couple of ceremonial meetings that come up, even just in there saying, oh, we had these ADRs are coming up. If you want to get involved, if you know, these things are being announced. So just, again, just sort of putting those into your normal comms, your normal communication flows, whatever they might be, because again, they're just becoming part of the fabric. And you can, of course, get a bit stick-based with it, which is, we need one. You know, if you're the person in charge, this is one where I want one to be done because we're going to spend money or something. So you can start to kind of, we need one of these before we even go and have the conversation about the vendor or whatever it might be. But I don't like using the stick. It's good to have the stick sometimes. Responsible stick holder, of course.
Yeah.
And there's a question here in the middle, down the back there.
Okay. Question about the ADR template. So is there any template that you would recommend or possible to use?
So the question was, is there any template you'd recommend or structure that you sort of stood as a starting point?
Yeah, there's one in my book. If you want that.
One copy of which is available at the bookshop.
Run. Yeah. I do somewhere also. Yes. So I think it's also on my website as well. If you check out jacquireed.com, there is I've got a blog, but there's also a knowledge vault, which has got a couple of longer form articles, and one of those is about ADRs, and I'm pretty sure it's also in there. But I kind of recommend sort of two different types. So sometimes it's, okay, we just need to make sure that people understand why we made this decision. And maybe we didn't need to involve lots of people in it, but it's important to understand why we did it. And so you could do quite a short form version. But then if you want to use it in the decision-making process, you're going to say, this is a draft. We want people to actually add things here. Then I think it's important to put more information in there. You can also have a bit, I always put it at the bottom, although it's not really the last thing, but it's where people can add what they their kind of opinions and stuff to it, because it will be opinions. So they can add information like, oh, I did this in my last role and we did this and it really didn't work. Things like that, which are really useful. And you can say, oh, why? Why didn't it work? Because that's important too. But yeah, you can then collect all that information in there and then use that in the final decision-making process. So yeah, you can do long ones and short ones depending on what you want to do with it.
The one thing I would add is use that sort of newspaper article type thing where you've got the name and then the headline and then the decision and then anything sort of bigger after that. Make sure it's eminently readable at a glance if people need to glance, and then go into the detail if they need to go into the details.
Yeah, naming it as the decision that's made is quite useful, because then if you've got a list of them, people don't necessarily need to go in and see all the detail. They can just see what the decision is rather than like, oh, the question. If it's the question, then you've got to go in and have a look at it. But if it's just the decision, that's quite useful for finding it.
I think that's really important. Like, some people just want to know the answer and some people want the full context. Ideally give them both, but put the answer at the top. 100% agree with that. I think we've got a question here at the front row.
Yes, thank you. We have these meetings regularly, and there's very often two problems that we encounter. One is that it ends in a myriad of details. It's less about design and architecture and more about how do we actually start implementing it, and it goes down a rabbit hole of details. That's problem number one. And problem number two is very often when there's domain experts in the thing and then the questions are exchanged, it goes into the what I call what if loop that also kind of goes on for a very long time and then generally leads to something that is over-engineered potentially. How to avoid those two, or do you have any good tips on how to avoid those two traps?
Do you mind if I take this? I mean, I would say if you're in a meeting and you think it's going on too long, and I would say the quick thing is, we need this done. You three people seem to want to really get into this. Go away and do it. Come back later. Like creating like little cross-functional subgroups. So, okay, can someone from the business side, can someone from techies want to get into this? Why don't you two, you three, you four, we need to have it done, break out, here's the time, come back and present back, and just get them out of the session. Right. And then that's what that would be a suggestion, because some people will self-select into want to be part of that process. Some people won't, but you don't want to have everyone to sit through it. I know.
Yeah, I like using something similar, like a parking lot kind of thing, where you go, okay, this is really important. I'm going to write it down here, and anyone who's interested, as you say, can get together with it. But this is what we're doing. So it's like you need a facilitator who kind of has a bit of experience in doing that and going, right, you don't need to have an exact agenda to this, but you like, okay, this is what we want. This is the outcome that we want from this meeting. And if we carry on like this, we're never going to get there. So you've just got to very nicely say, this is really important. We're going to park it for now. And then we can move on to it.
And on your second problem of over-engineering, we could spend the entire session on that. We could,
you're saying we could over-engineer the answer about over-engineering?
I'm going to under-engineer that. I'm going to say two things. Firstly, Kent Beck's design rules, go away and check them out. And secondly, if you didn't see it, Daniel Terhorst North's talk on Best Simple System, for now, his blog article, which apparently he's rewriting, although I like the last version of it, it's an awesome attitude to avoiding over-engineering.
Awesome. We have a question over here in the middle row. Where's all my camera set? Oh, so.
How do you usually include the financial analysis in the ADRs for each architectural decision in order to present to the financial department if that decision is cost efficient?
So the question was about putting financial information in your ADR. You can do that. You can, maybe you've got some spreadsheets that do stuff, but you don't need to put all that information in there. So you can put a summary and you can say, here's a link to the spreadsheet. You can put anything that's vitally important, like you might have a little graph or whatever. You can put visual stuff in there. But obviously, if you've got that spreadsheet, you've probably got that in like SharePoint or something, or it's probably in someone's personal OneDrive. So get it out of there, put it in the same place as the ADRs, so that you don't lose it, even if you're just making a copy and then referencing that copy. But you don't have to put everything into that ADR.
Oh, we had a question. Sorry, can you take this in the middle? The one over this side, if that's possible. I think someone was waiting to ask a question, and then we'll come back to you in a minute.
You have to number people.
Yes, we'll take tickets in a minute. We'll do our best to get to all of you.
Hello. So I'm a software engineer transitioning.
Oh, show the microphone.
Sorry. So I'm a software engineer transitioning to an architect role. So from a software engineer perspective, you need the low-level details, like this API should be like this, and this is what I want to implement. But as an architect, when you're presenting the first draft, you don't have all that information. It's very high level. So how do you bridge that gap, especially if you're interacting with multiple teams at the same time? And second question that I had was, the design itself is influenced by your experience, and there's a little bit of bias. Maybe you've used that tool before. That's why you want to propagate the use of that tool. So how do you standardize like software designs across an enterprise org?
Two very good questions.
Do you want to take the first one and I'll have a go at the second?
Yes. What was this first one again?
How do you bridge the gap between the kind of developers wanting the detail and the architect needing to kind of think about the bigger picture stuff, I guess?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. So I find that it actually varies. So some developers want to be told exactly what to do, and others just want to be told what the outcome is. And I think the more healthy version of that is the outcome, because the thing is, the architect may not, well, probably doesn't have the detailed experience. I mean, they might do, but they probably don't have the detailed experience of writing in that particular language or of that particular architecture, because architects tend to have they know a little about a lot. So there are lots of people who know more about you as an architect and are better suited to make that particular decision. So I think for architects, it's important not to make all the decisions, but to make the decisions that are relevant at their level. That's like, okay, we want to standardize this across these teams or things like that. And then hand that over to the teams to actually then make that decision themselves. Because as you said, we don't have the information. We want to put off making decisions until it's, people tend to call it the last responsible moment, but I think you've got to pull back from that a bit. You've got to go, right, when am I going to have enough information to make this decision? And the thing is, you're never going to have all that information, because that's like after everything. You're never going to know everything that can happen. We need to think things are going to change. So we need to just consider that. But yeah, you need to just don't control everything. Allow the people who have the right knowledge to make those decisions.
On your, sorry, was that? On the second one, how do you standardize? I think I twist the question very slightly into sort of, what do you standardize? Do you standardize at all? And I think that's super important. You know, don't over standardize, don't over remove duplication. There are reasons to happily allow sort of different decisions in different contexts. But if you are going to, then platform engineering ultimately is the answer on these days in the sort of modern way of doing things. How to do that? Read some of Gregor Hope's stuff on that. Gregor, and I found he borrowed the quote from a guy called Desmond D'Souza, talks about platform engineering as where the architecture lives, and that the architecture is something that removes needless creativity from developers. So you want developers to create and be creative in the business problem space. You don't necessarily want them to be creative in sort of what ORM tool they're using or what serialization library they're using. You stick that below the line. If it's a good thing to remove from their creativity and let them create value.
One other thing I'll just add on that is, when deciding when I should standardize or when I shouldn't, is recognizing that the moment you standardize something, you're increasing the cost of changing your mind around that thing later. So if I standardize on something, if I change my mind later, it's going to take more work or more effort. So that also means I have to put more thought into what I'm standardizing in the first place. So where you've got things that have a high cost of change later, a lot of thought needs to go into it now because that high cost of change in the future. If it's something where if you want to, you could change your mind and no one really cares, well, don't sweat making the decision because you can change your mind really, really easily. So I think when you're going from being a developer to that architect role, thinking in terms of, if we change our mind next week, is it a problem? No, then I'm not going to worry about it because the architecture, you're often spending more time worrying about the stuff that's going to be super hard to change later on. Well, we've got one question over here, and then we'll come back over this side. We've got a stack. I think we've got one and then two. Sort of.
Have you ever been a barman, Sam?
No, this is bad barman.
So as time passed by, like there's code and documents, and the document can't keep up the speed of the code. So as time passed by, like these documents get dangling, and it's kind of hard to find those decisions we made, and like the service changes and names changes. So how can we keep up these differences or like mitigate with these?
There's a few things you can do with that. So the further down, the more detail you go into, the more it's going to change. So if you're trying to document names of stuff in the code, that can change multiple times a day. In theory, it could change in prod multiple times a day if people keep flip-flopping over stuff. But at the high level, stuff doesn't change very much. So I always say to people, document only in as much detail as you need, because then you've got less to maintain. If people don't need that detail, if people aren't ever reading it, why produce it in the first place? Why then confuse people with stuff that's out of date? If you do need stuff that's detailed, then you want to try and find ways of automating that. So if you're trying to document your API, you use things like OpenAPI, because when you build, that then automatically updates the documentation for you, because you don't want to be manually doing stuff like that, especially if it's a public API to your customers as well. So yeah, documentation only go into the amount of detail that you need to do. If people are asking you questions, this is a really good one. If people keep asking questions, don't reply with the answer, be it in an email or a Slack channel or whatever. Don't give them the answer, give them a link to the answer. If the answer doesn't exist, create it, give them a link. If the answer isn't up to date, update it, give them the link. And then you don't have to keep answering the same question over and over. People can then find it as well. So, top tip.
Two things I'd add to that, and I forget where this quote comes from. Maybe Martin remembers. If the code and documentation disagree, both of them are wrong. But Ruth Malan talks about two reasons for visual documentation. One is to describe your intention. So what are we going to do? And maybe you can throw the documentation away after that, but you're documenting something just to think before you do it. You don't necessarily leap straight into the code. You do some visual documentation. And the other is for reflection. What have we done? What have we seen? What have we observed in production? How can we discuss that? Because there's going to be a feedback loop.
Awesome. Got a question here at the front.
Hello. You have mentioned a little about load. It's very interesting. And from enterprise architects' perspective, they, by DNA, they are focusing on in long run, right? It's somehow against some MVP approaches and maybe agile approaches and practices, and how this can be managed and at what extent they have to be involved.
So this is a comment. So can you maybe so you're talking about the timescales over which you're making decisions? Or?
No, I mean when enterprise architects are involved, they are focused in long run, right? So in sometimes when you want to launch MVP, maybe long run is not always clear. Maybe little about a lot, but anyway.
Yeah, so you talk about the different timescales in the business. So like a technical architect is probably working on much shorter timescales than a solution architect. And then, so yeah, different people call different types of architects different things. So I'm going to assume by enterprise architect that you mean someone who is probably working like at the highest level. So they might be working on the technical stuff. They might only be working in the more business process stuff, but they might be working across the whole lot of data and everything. But I think when it's first of all, it's important to understand, as you've said, that there are these different timescales. But when you're kind of communicating down, it's like I said before, you need to kind of make the decisions that are appropriate at that level with the information you've got. Push the decision out if you can, but communicate down what your need is. Not like the people at the top of the business don't go, oh, we need this encryption level on our email because of this. You go, we need this. We've been told by regulators that we need to meet these standards, and then that filters down, and someone goes, oh, okay, we need this type of encryption on our API or whatever. So yeah, communicate down like your needs, what the outcomes are, and make the decisions only at that's kind of the appropriate level.
Because you've talked a lot about this fractal sense at Saxo, because you're thinking about, to Jacqui's point, you're thinking about enterprise architecture at the whole. You've got 3,000 developers. So like, how does that work for you? I mean, practically, what do you end up doing? Just go speak to every one of the 3,000 developers individually and have a chat?
Not at all. It's knowing who knows people who know people who know people. It's getting the cascade right, understanding the interlink between the organization and the architecture, and that's sort of what I talk about, is this fractal interlink between the organization architecture, the technical architecture, the value architecture, and ideally these are nested inside one another. So if you want to change something at the lowest level, well, you know who to talk to 2 levels above that. The one thing I would add is I think maybe you're implying, certainly I have seen it, is that some forms of enterprise architecture conflict with agility. They expect sort of predictability and certainty. My talk on Wednesday evening that I've given before, and do go watch it online, talks about how to take a sort of much more modern approach to enterprise architecture. So there is more alignment. So effectively it's pulling the same direction, that enterprise architecture is creating the space for agility rather than impeding it. It is effectively saying, pushing the decisions down to the right level. Some of this is aligned with David Marquette's stuff about intent-based leadership and the leader-leader model rather than the leader-follower model. And this is all about saying, well, great, enterprise architecture should have a long-term view. It should create a North Star, but that North Star needs to be humble. It doesn't need to be predictive. It doesn't need to be directive. Does that make sense?
Thank you. We've had some great references of other people to follow up. We've heard about Ruth Milan, the person you mentioned.
David Marquette
as well. There's probably a Wardley map in here that would explain it. I wouldn't work out how to draw it myself, but there's probably one in here somewhere. We've probably got enough time for one more question. So I think we have a question. I don't think we had a back row question. So maybe we grab one of the people in the back row over there. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is, how have you approached establishing feedback loops? So once a decision has been made, we've done it with the information at that point of time, and we do the engineering and we learn new facts, new lessons. How do you reconcile and go back in time?
Great question.
So again, in my talk on Wednesday, I talk about enterprise architecture at scale being one big feedback loop, being DevOps at scale. Some of this is as much observing. Not that many, not enough enterprise architects are looking at observability tools and looking at how the systems and organizations they work with actually, how did those decisions end up? How is the production data actually, working with that approach to scalability you put in that element of the system? So some of the feedback loop for me is just observability and taking that up to enterprise scale. But of course, the other side of it is talking to people, and it's understanding. Well, great, we talked about that. How's that working out for you? How's that working out socially? How's it working? Do your teams coping with the cognitive load of having to do that thing? So yeah, observing and communicating, I think, are the 2 big things there.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely collaboration. But with the ACE model, we talk about how the decisions from the design affect the architecture, affect the engineering. But then we get feedback from the engineering into the architecture and the architecture into the design. But then we also at the next kind of level, we get down to like the actual like app. And when we get to that level, we also get feedback going back up into like into the next level up into the business. And it all needs to flow like that. And if it only ever goes down, then it's not going to be successful, because people are going to say, yeah, we think this is a good idea. And the engineers at the bottom are going to go, it's really not a good idea, but okay. And that's when we really get the problem. So yes, communication is very important. Collaboration, I don't see enough of it.
I think part of the problem here is often that architects are, they're incentivized around having the architecture, and they're not incentivized about making people happy with their decisions. I think if you have to speak to them a lot, it's very difficult to make decisions that make people unhappy and spend time with them. So spending time with them, I think, becomes a lovely forcing function. I think on that note, I think we just need to talk more. We need to get on more. So that's just a nice point. I think that's a nice point at which to end our panel. Thank you so much indeed, Jacqui and Simon, for your time. And thank you all for your awesome questions.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GOTO podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.